Look closely at what's dripping down that tree bark. It's golden, thick, glistening, dripping slow and heavy like syrup. And it looks exactly like honey. It's not. There's no beehive anywhere near it, no bees involved at all. What's actually happening is an insect, feeding quietly on the tree, is secreting this sweet liquid directly out of its own body, essentially as waste. And somewhere in ancient history, a human being looked at that dripping insect excreted liquid and thought, that looks sweet, and put their finger in it, then tasted it, then went back for more. If that sounds insane to you, good, because it should. But once you understand exactly how starved for sweetness ancient humans actually were, that decision stops looking crazy and starts looking almost inevitable. For nearly all of human history, before farming, before any kind of stored food, sweetness barely existed anywhere in the human diet. Meat, roots, nuts, whatever plants were currently in season, that was the baseline. Real concentrated sweetness was almost nowhere to be found. And yet the human brain craves sugar with an intensity that goes far beyond simple taste preference. Because sweetness signals dense, fast, safe calories. A survival advantage so powerful that evolution wired the craving directly into the brain's reward system. The problem is that biology built an intense, constant craving into a species living in a world that almost never had anything around to satisfy it. And when a craving is that strong and the environment offers almost nothing to answer it, people start looking in places you'd never expect. Which brings us back to that dripping tree. What ancient humans found there is called honeydew, and despite the name, it has absolutely nothing to do with bees. Certain insects, particularly aphids, and a group of insects called scale insects, feed by piercing plant stems and drawing out sap, which is loaded with sugar but low in the specific proteins the insect actually needs. So the insect's body processes an enormous amount of that sap just to extract what little protein is in it and expels the leftover sugar as a sticky, sweet waste product that coats leaves, bark, and the ground beneath infested trees. In several documented cultures, this wasn't treated as disgusting. It was treated as a legitimate food source. Indigenous groups in parts of Australia are documented collecting honeydew directly off of certain eucalyptus trees, scraping it into containers by the handful during peak season, sometimes in quantities substantial enough to be dried and stored for later use, essentially functioning as one of the only reliable sources of concentrated sugar available to them in that environment. Other groups across different arid regions of the world independently discovered the exact same substance and used it the exact same way, which tells you something important. This wasn't a rare, desperate, one-off act by a single starving person. It was a recognized, repeated, intentional food source, collected specifically because it delivered something almost nothing else in the environment could. And once you know that people were willing to scrape sugar out of insect waste, actual honey suddenly looks a lot less strange, and a lot more like the safer option by comparison. Except getting to it was arguably even more dangerous. Wild beehives were rarely convenient. The most productive ones were often built high on cliff faces or deep in tree canopies, positioned there specifically because the height kept most predators away, which of course meant that reaching them required humans to become the exception. In Nepal, honey hunters have climbed sheer rock faces using handmade rope ladders for generations, ascending hundreds of feet to reach nests built by the world's largest honeybee, getting stung repeatedly throughout the entire climb, sometimes dozens or hundreds of times in a single trip, while balancing on ropes with nothing beneath them but open air. And this isn't some modern extreme sport. Rock art discovered in a cave in Spain, dated to roughly 8,000 years old, shows a human figure climbing toward a wild hive on ropes, surrounded by swarming bees, doing essentially the exact same thing honey hunters in Nepal still do today. 8,000 years, and the method barely changed, because the trade being made, real physical danger for a small, sweet reward, never stopped being worth it to the people making it. A successful climb might yield only a few pounds of honey mixed with wax, dead bees, and debris. Measured purely as survival calories, the risk barely makes sense. Measured as the most intense, desirable sensation available in an otherwise sweetness-starved world, it made perfect sense to nearly every culture that ever attempted it. So if this is what it took, insect secretions scraped off of bark, Cliffside climbs into swarms of furious bees. How did sugar ever stop being rare? How did it end up sitting in a cupboard in nearly every kitchen on the planet? The plant responsible was sugarcane, native to New Guinea, which slowly spread across Asia over thousands of years as people discovered it could be processed into something far more concentrated and reliable than honey or honeydew ever could. But turning raw cane into usable sugar required brutal, repetitive manual labor. Cutting tough, fibrous cane by hand under extreme heat, crushing it, boiling the extracted juice for hours over open fires just to concentrate it into crystals. For centuries, that labor bottleneck kept refined sugar rare and staggeringly expensive, sold in small amounts to the wealthiest people in the world, sometimes locked away and guarded like a jewel rather than stored like an ordinary pantry item. Then, starting in the 1500s, European powers began establishing sugarcane plantations across the Americas and the Caribbean, specifically to satisfy growing demand for sweetness back home. And the labor problem that had kept sugar rare for so long was answered with something horrific. Millions of enslaved people were forcibly transported and worked, often to death, specifically to grow and process sugarcane at the scale global demand now required. Historians consider sugar plantations among the deadliest destinations in the entire transatlantic slave trade, with brutal conditions, extreme heat, and dangerous processing equipment killing enslaved workers at rates higher than almost any other forced labor industry of that era. The same craving that once sent a person climbing toward a beehive or scraping honeydew off of bark scaled up across an entire global economy became one of the deadliest, most exploitative industries in human history. It's an uncomfortable thing to hold in your head at the same time. The instinct that made someone climb a cliff face toward danger for a few pounds of honey reads today as almost admirable, resourceful, daring. That same instinct, once industrialized, fueled a system built on forced human suffering at a scale that's difficult to fully comprehend. The craving never changed. What changed was how far removed the person eating the final product became from the cost of producing it. There's a moment worth picturing somewhere in the deep past, far from cliffs and far from plantations. A hand reaching toward a tree trunk coated in something sticky and gold, fingers pressing into it, lifting it slowly to the mouth. And for just a second after weeks, maybe months, of nothing but roots and dry meat and whatever the season happened to allow, something on the tongue that's actually undeniably sweet.